Picture this. February 1886. The South African Highveld stretches out under a brutal summer sun, 30,000 square miles of grass, rock, and red soil. For most of human history, this place has been worthless. No diamonds. No silver. Just cattle farms and the occasional hopeful prospector who walks away empty-handed. But beneath your feet right now, as you stand on that scrubland, lies half the gold ever pulled from the earth. You just don't know it yet. Asterisk by early 1886. South Africa's gold rush is dying before it ever really lived. The Barberton fields to the east, tapped out. The Strubin brothers, veteran miners, have been crawling over the Witwatersrand Hills for years, finding trace reefs like the so-called Confidence Reef, shallow, inconsistent, barely worth the dynamite. The establishment, the geologists in Cape Town, the mining syndicates in Kimberley, they've written off this region. The consensus is clear. If there's gold here, it's not enough to matter. They're about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Asterisk, this is the story of three men. 3 Georges, to be precise. George Walker, George Harrison, George Honeyball. They're not geologists. They're not engineers. They're laborers, drifters, the kind of men who take work where they can find it and move on when the money runs out in the winter of 1885. Walker and Harrison are headed to Barberton, chasing rumors of work in the goldfields. They make it as far as the Witwatersrand, a low ridge of hills running east to west, and then their money runs out, so they stop. They take jobs. Construction work. Fence repair. Whatever the local Boer farmers will pay them to do. One of those farms is called Langlogged. Asterisk. It's a nondescript piece of land. Widow Usteson owns it. She rents out parcels to workers and travelers. Harrison takes a tent site there. Walker is staying at a neighboring farm, Driefontein. And on a morning in late February 1886, the exact date is lost to history. George Walker is walking across Langlaagte to visit his friend Harrison. He's not looking for gold. He's not surveying. He's just walking, and then his foot catches on something. Asterisk, a rock. An outcrop. A ridge of quartzite breaking through the topsoil, angled at maybe 30 degrees. Walker stumbles, catches himself, looks down. Most men would keep walking. George Walker doesn't. Asterisk, because George Walker used to be a coal miner. And coal miners know rock. They know the way sedimentary layers tilt. They know the difference between surface scatter and bedrock. They know what it means when a formation runs consistent for more than a few feet. Walker kneels. He chips at the outcrop with his knife. The rock is hard conglomerate, packed tight with pebbles and matrix, and threaded through it, barely visible in the morning light, are thin seams of yellow metal gold. Asterisk, Walker calls for Harrison. The 2 men spend the rest of the day following the outcrop. It doesn't peter out. It doesn't bend away into nothing. It runs east to west, consistent, for as far as they can track it across the farm, by nightfall. They've made a decision. They're going to stake a claim. Asterisk. Let's be clear about who these men are. George Harrison is a builder by trade. Australian-born, 32 years old, with a history of moving from job to job across the frontier. He's worked in construction, in mining camps, in anywhere that pays. He's not educated. He's not connected. He's a laborer, George Walker. Same story? A former coal miner from England, drifting through South Africa with no fixed address and no prospects. The third man, George Honeyball, is even less defined. A wagon driver, a handyman. A ghost in the historical record. These are not the men who are supposed to discover the richest gold deposit in human history. Asterisk. On February 20th, 1886, or possibly a few days earlier, Harrison and Walker walk into the mining commissioner's office in the nearby settlement of Rudeport. They file a claim. Asterisk, the filing costs them 5 shillings. The claim is 30 by 20 meters. Standard size? Nothing unusual. The clerk stamps it, files it, forgets it. But here's the thing. Harrison and Walker don't fully understand what they found, Asterisk, the Witwatersrand Basin is not a vein. It's not a pocket. It's not a surface scatter of alluvial gold. It's a 3 billion rolled sedimentary basin, stretching over 300 kilometers in an arc across the Highveld. The gold isn't in veins, it's in horizontal beds. Ancient riverbeds that got buried, compressed, and tilted by tectonic shifts over eons. The main reef that Walker stumbled over is just one of dozens of these reefs stacked on top of each other, layered like a geological cake, and it goes deep. Asterisk, the conventional wisdom in 1886, among the few geologists who even bothered to look, is that Witwatersrand reefs are shallow. 30 meters, 50 maybe. Beyond that, the gold content will drop off. It always does. They're basing this on experience from other fields. Barberton, the Transvaal. Places where gold deposits are narrow, vertical, finite. But Witwatersrand is different. The reefs here don't drop off. They tilt gently, maybe 10 to 30 degrees, and they keep going. 100 meters. 300. 1,000. The main reef alone is traceable for over 50 kilometers laterally, and vertically it descends to depths that won't be fully explored for another century. But in February 1886, nobody knows this yet. Asterisk. So why does Harrison push forward? Because he's broke. Because he's spent his entire adult life chasing the next payday. Because he's 32 years old, living in a tent, and this is his shot. And because, unlike the educated men in Cape Town, Harrison doesn't have the luxury of skepticism. He can't afford to wait for a geologist's report or a syndicate's approval. He has a claim. He has a reef. And he has nothing to lose. Asterisk, now if you like us. Believe that human ingenuity and sheer stubborn persistence can solve any problem? Take a second and hit that subscribe button below. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We want to hear from you. Asterisk, here's where things get interesting. Harrison doesn't have money for a full mining operation. No stamp mill. No crushing equipment, crew. So he does what any practical man would do. He starts digging by hand. He sinks a shallow shaft. Maybe 3 meters, 4. Just enough to get below the weathered surface rock and into solid conglomerate. He pulls up samples. He crushes them with a hammer. He pans the powder, and the gold content holds. Asterisk, not spectacular. Not bonanza grade. But consistent. 8 grams per ton, 10. 12 in some pockets. To a trained geologist, this would be marginal. Barely economic. But Harrison isn't a geologist. He's a builder. And builders know that consistency is more valuable than flash. A narrow, high-grade vein might pay out fast, but it'll run dry. A broad, low-grade deposit that holds for depth, that's a fortune. That's a lifetime. Asterisk, Harrison and Walker start tracing the reef laterally. They walk the outcrop east, into the neighboring farms, Dreyfontein, Elansfontein. Everywhere they go, the same reef breaks the surface. Same dip, same strike. Same gold content. This isn't a fluke. This is a system. Asterisk, word spreads. Slowly at first, the Strubin brothers, who've been prospecting this area for years, hear about the claim and come to investigate. They're skeptical. They've seen a dozen discoveries in Witwatersrand that turned out to be nothing. But when they examine the reef, they change their tune. Fred Strubin, in his diary, writes, "This is not an isolated vein. This is a sedimentary gold field of unprecedented scale. If it holds for depth, and I believe it will, this will make Barberton look like a footnote." Asterisk, by March 1886, the rush is on. Prospectors flood into the Witwatersrand. Claims are staked by the hundreds. Farms that were worth £50 in January are selling for £5,000 by April. The bore. Farmers who've been sitting on this land for decades suddenly realize they're millionaires. Widow Oosthuizen, the owner of Langlog, sells her farm for £6,000. She'll die a year later, never seeing the full scale of what lay beneath her cattle pastures. Asterisk. But here's the problem. Proving that the reef goes deep requires industrial equipment, shafts, head frames, stamp mills. That requires capital. Lots of it, and capital requires certainty. The mining syndicates in Kimberley? The men who control the diamond fields aren't convinced. They send geologists. The geologists drill test holes. 20 meters, 30, 50, and at 50 meters, the gold content doesn't drop, it holds. This is the moment. The aha moment that changes everything. Because if the reef holds at 50 meters, there's no reason it won't hold at 100, or 200, or deeper. The main reef isn't a surface deposit. It's a layer or horizontal bed of gold-bearing conglomerate that extends across the entire basin. And if that's true, then the Witwatersrand isn't just a gold field. It's the only gold field that will ever matter. Asterisk. By mid-1886, the first industrial mines are under construction. The landlocked estate and gold mining company, the Ferreira Deep, the Robinson Deep. They're betting everything on a theory that says this reef will keep going, that the gold won't run out at 60 meters or 80 meters or 100, and the only way to prove it is to dig. Asterisk. The first shaft at landlocked reaches 100 meters by September 1886. The gold content, 9.4 grams per ton at 150 meters, 10.1 grams per ton at 200 meters. Still holding, asterisk. The geologists were wrong. The skeptics were wrong. The conventional wisdom was catastrophically, expensively, historically wrong. It's half of all the gold ever extracted in human history, asterisk. And it all started with a laborer who knew how to read rock, asterisk. But of course, this being South Africa in the 1880s, nothing is ever simple. The Transvaal Republic, the Boer government that controls this region, suddenly has a problem. A very profitable problem. Because if the Witwatersrand is as rich as it appears, then thousands, tens of thousands of foreign miners are about to flood into their territory. British, Australians, Americans, men who don't speak Afrikaans, don't respect Boer law, and definitely won't vote for Boer politicians. The Transvaal government's solution? Control, asterisk, in September 1886. President Paul Kruger signs the Gold Law. It's a masterpiece of bureaucratic obstruction. Claim sizes are restricted. Foreign ownership is limited. Mining licenses require approval from Pretoria. Export tariffs are imposed on gold shipments. And most crucially, Uitlanders foreigners are denied voting rights. No matter how long they live in the Transvaal, the message is clear. You can dig our gold, but you'll never control it. Asterisk, and then there's the labor problem. The reef is deep, dangerously deep. Temperatures at depth exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Ventilation is minimal. Rockfalls are constant. The Boer mine owners, many of whom have never run a mine before, resort to the cheapest labor they can find. Migrant workers from across southern Africa, paid a fraction of what white miners earn, and housed in compounds that are barely better than prisons. This is the ugly side of Witwatersrand, the side that doesn't make it into the heroic narratives. Because while George Harrison's discovery unlocked a geological treasure, it also built an economic system based on exploitation, one that will shape South African politics for the next century. Asterisk in Harrison, the man who found it all? By late 1886, he's already being squeezed out. His claim 19. The original landlocked claim is worth a fortune. But Harrison doesn't have the capital to develop it. He doesn't have a stamp mill. He doesn't have a head frame. He doesn't have a crew, so he does what poor men always do. He sells. Asterisk. In October 1886, Harrison sells his share of Claim 19 to the landlocked estate and gold mining company for £10. £10. That's it. The claim will eventually produce over 1.5 million ounces of gold worth over $3 billion in today's money. Harrison gets £10 and walks away. Asterisk by 1887. He's left the Transvaal entirely. He drifts east, back toward Barberton, looking for work. There are reports he dies in a mining accident sometime in the early 1890s. No grave. No monument. No recognition. The man who discovered half the world's gold dies broke and forgotten. Asterisk, but the city he created? That thrives. By 1890, Johannesburg is the fastest growing city on Earth. 40,000 people. By 1895, 100,000. By 1900, it's the largest city in southern Africa. Built entirely on the back of Witwatersrand gold. The mine owners, Barney Barnetto, Cecil Rhodes, the landlords, become some of the wealthiest men in the world. They build mansions. They fund wars. They reshape empires, and none of them ever thank George Harrison. Asterisk, because here's the truth. The establishment doesn't celebrate the men who stumble onto greatness. They celebrate the men who capitalize on it. Harrison had the discovery. But he didn't have the capital, the connections, or the education to turn that discovery into power, so the system took it from him. Legally, efficiently, permanently. Asterisk. So what's the legacy? Let's talk numbers between 1886 and 2020. The Witwatersrand Basin has produced approximately 50,000 metric tons of gold. That's 1.6 billion troy ounces. At modern prices, that's over $3 trillion, more than California, more than Australia, more than Alaska, the Yukon, the Klondike combined. Witwatersrand represents nearly 50% of all the gold ever mined in human history. Asterisk, and it's not slowing down. Even today, South African mines, despite being the deepest and most expensive in the world, continue to extract gold from depths exceeding 4 kilometers. That's deeper than the Mariana Trench is below sea level. Miners work in temperatures that exceed 60 degrees Celsius, in tunnels carved through rock that's been stable for 3 billion years. They use refrigeration systems, rock bolts, and ventilation shafts that make the original 1886 operations look like Stone Age tinkering. But the reef that George Harrison stumbled over in February 1886, it's still there, still producing, still holding. Asterisk, Johannesburg itself is now a city of 5 million people. It's the economic hub of southern Africa. It hosts the largest stock exchange on the continent. It's the headquarters of mining companies that operate across the globe, and every single meter of its existence, every building, every street, every rail line traces back to that outcrop on landlocked farm, to a rock, to a stumble, to a laborer who knew enough about geology to recognize what he'd found. Asterisk, claim 19 still exists, by the way. It's been mined out, obviously. The original site is now part of a heritage area, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. There's a plaque. It reads, "On this site in February 1886, George Harrison discovered the main reef of the Witwatersrand, leading to the establishment of Johannesburg."
That's it.
No statue, no monument. Just a plaque. Asterisk. But here's the thing. History doesn't care about recognition. It cares about results, and the result of George Harrison's discovery is this. The modern global economy runs on gold as a reserve asset. Central banks hold gold. Currencies are stabilized against gold. The entire structure of 20th century finance, Bretton Woods, the gold standard. The reserve system was built on the assumption that gold would always be available in sufficient quantities. That assumption was only possible because of Witwatersrand. Asterisk, without Harrison's stumble. Without the Witwatersrand Basin, the world would have run out of economically extractable gold by the 1920s. The gold standard would have collapsed decades earlier. The financial crises of the 20th century would have played out entirely differently. You can argue about whether that's good or bad, but you can't argue about the scale. One man. Half the world's gold? Asterisk, and that's the lesson here. The experts were wrong. The geologists who said Witwatersrand was shallow? Wrong. The syndicates who dismissed it as marginal? Wrong. The governments who thought they could control it? Wrong. The only person who was right was a broke laborer who knew how to read rock, and who didn't have the luxury of overthinking it. He didn't have a degree. He didn't have a theory. He had a stubbed toe and the experience to know what he was. Looking at Anne, that's the genius of it. Asterisk, because the World's greatest discoveries, the ones that actually change history there. Not made in boardrooms or laboratories. They're made by people who are too stubborn, too broke, or too desperate to quit. People like George Harrison. Asterisk stories of practical genius like this are everywhere, hidden in the margins of history, waiting for someone to dig them up. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you're subscribed for more. And don't forget to drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. We want to know. Until next time.